Hey everyone, this is Samson, CEO of Pixelmatic, and I have Tim and Yasser with me. We're going to go through the Infinite Fleet roadmap today.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, so let's start, I guess, from events. Yasser, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So we created this roadmap to let everyone know what we're sort of planning to work on. A lot of this we already started working on actually, which is why it's sort of at the beginning. And of course, we did that poll a while back to ask players what they'd like to see first. And that was accounted for as well when we sort of ordered these things. So events, we're very close to completing, and that's something we promised in the last patch notes. So it should be coming soon. What we're gonna do is create these leaderboard events where players compete for the most kills at specific locations, and we give out a number of rewards for them. So these events are gonna be a little bit more fair than what we had previously because we create different leaderboards for people at different points in progression. So we have a lower tier event for newer players, and then we have the higher tier events for our veteran players who are already at max level on their ships. And of course, the highest tiers get the best rewards. So we do want to reward the players who have been with us for a long time. There's going to be a series of these events, and they do follow a story. So we're going to be publishing that story on social media. So there's like a whole background to why you guys have to sort of do these things, why you need to sort of kill the Aatrox, mine the resources, and the final event will have a special reward as well. Should we go on to the next one, or would you guys like to discuss events a bit more?
Yeah.
So the Prospector, that's actually the big reward at the end of the event. So that's a new ship. It's a bit unique. It's, as the name implies, something connected with mining. So it's more of a utility ship, but it should sort of speed up the mining process for the players who own them.
Yep. So that's all part of the event. So a lot of these things, we started building them quite a while ago, and we just decided to push them out alongside different elements of the game, like events. So that's why it's coming out at this time. And there's a teaser of it. If you look at our social media banners, you can see the Prospector lingering up there in some asteroid field.
So the other bits that you guys can see on the roadmap, they are there to sort of address some of the feedback we've been getting. So we do listen to what players say on Discord, and we have had a number of discussions on how to sort of address them. So one of the complaints that we had is that there aren't too many ways players can fight the Aatrox right now. So one of the strategies being used is to use the long-range artillery ships like the ballista and cannon. And that is a valid strategy, so I'm really happy that the players are using it. But we want more. So we would really like players to have more options so that they can feel a sense of accomplishment when they figure out how to sort of defeat the different types of enemies. Like the Tenebris is right now a bit challenging because the Tenebris also has a very long range, much like the cannon. So what can players do with it? So what we're doing now is we want to improve what we already have, which is the existing abilities like Mechs. So you have the Carrier, you have the Versa. Their Mechs are useful at level 1, but not so much later on because they cannot be upgraded. So we're going to fix that, much like I think missiles right now. These abilities can be upgraded, so they're still useful throughout the entire game. So the Carrier will be very effective at taking out the Tenebris because you can basically send your mechs off to destroy it without having to move your ships. Of course, it will be useful at destroying pretty much everything because mechs are good at damaging ships. The other one is the shield for the Guardian. So at level 1 it's useful, but at higher levels, again, it cannot take too much damage because it cannot be upgraded. We're fixing that. So the players can deploy a shield. The shield absorbs a certain amount of damage, and in that time you can destroy the enemies. So that way you minimize the amount of damage you're taking. So that's another strategy. That way you don't have to use range to protect your ships, like with a cannon. You can use lower range ships, like the Hammer, for example, which is actually pretty good on DPS and has really decent armor. And you can get closer, deploy the shield, and you're going to take very little damage with that. And of course, there's the hammer ability. So the hammer right now it's a bit of a grunt. It's got decent armor, decent shields, decent DPS. It's like a frontline fighter, but it doesn't have any good ability. So we're going to fix that. We're going to improve the hammer with something that will help deal with large numbers of enemies and basically slow down the rate of attrition.
So with the hammer, I think we had to create some new VFX for that, right? To kind of show players how to cast the ability. Tim, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's what you see if you pay close attention to the preview image that we put down in there. This is something that we're trying to implement on all of the ships, but it's a type of preview to give players an idea of what the ability is going to do. You see this a lot in most MOBA titles. You'll see there's some kind of projection on the floor or a hologram of where the ability is going to show up. And we're going to be doing that for all of our ships, whether it's the hammer ability here, or if it's projecting a line of travel for your ship. It's all going to use this same kind of immediate interface so that you can plan a little bit better, but also know with a fair degree of confidence that your ability will affect the ships that you intend it to.
So how does the hammer's ability work?
I can go into that a bit. So it's basically suppression. What it does is it fires these special graviton rounds that prevent the enemies from moving and firing their weapons. It slows them down. So in terms of gameplay, that's basically a debuff. They're taking a penalty to their fire rate and movement rate. In terms of the sci-fi aspect, we're using a graviton technology that affects the ships with a kind of gravitational field. So it's fairly standard, like Tim said, in MOBAs and also RPG games, RTS games. So you have suppression in a lot of those. And it's super useful for basically reducing the amount of damage the enemy is doing to you. So that's a common complaint, that the enemies are doing too much damage. So this will help reduce that. Of course, it's still up to players to use it strategically. They need to watch where the enemies are coming from. They need to face the hammer in that direction and make sure they try to cover as much of that area as possible. As is the case with all suppression in games, you kind of have to be wary of what's happening on the map. You need to understand where the enemies are coming from, what direction. And our ships are fighting in a full 3D space, so it's not really like a top-down map view. You have to be aware of the verticality as well. Like, are they below you, above you, left, right, back, forward? So it does require a bit of planning. Rushing in is never a good idea. So that's something we do emphasize with the gameplay, that you need to plan your attack. It is a strategy game in the end. But with these tools, it should be a lot easier.
Does the suppression ability reach a Tenebris? Because Tenebris is pretty long range, right?
No, the Tenebris is actually a counter to suppression. So we don't want one strategy to work in all cases, but the carrier's mechs do reach the Tenebris.
Okay.
So there are counters to counters.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a bunch more stuff here. AFK missions, that also is there to address some issues. So there isn't enough USF credits in the economy right now. We are aware. It's not intended. It's just a result of not implementing all the features we wanted to that award USF credits. So we looked at all the different things we could do, and AFK missions came up as a prime candidate for the next thing to add to the game, because we noticed that a number of players are kind of playing the group events in a way that kind of implies it's an AFK mission. It's not meant to be an AFK mission, but it's being played that way. So group events is something we'll fix later to make it behave the way it's supposed to, as in a group event where players work together and cooperate and overcome different obstacles together. But for now, we're adding AFK missions, which allow players to just start a timer that sends their ships off on a mission. They don't need to participate, so it's automatic. And then when the ships return, they get a USF credit reward. So if they do that every day, then they should have more than enough income to sort of pay for their upgrades, pay for equipment. So this will fix the USF credit issue. As we add more features to the game that award you credits, we'll always sort of tune the amount of rewards being given, because we do want players to participate in group events. So, and we do want to reward them for that. We would like the MMO to be an active environment where everyone is cooperating and working together. But until that's implemented, we don't want people to be out of USF credits either. So this is a compromise for now.
Yeah. So Tim, how do we access the AFK missions? I know that they're first to be in the companion app, right? But then are we also going to have them in game as well?
Yeah, there will be a menu that you can use to access them from inside of the game, as well as notifications that'll pop up each time that one is finished.
Okay.
This is essentially entirely a UI-based feature. They are AFK after all.
Right. So which ships are being sent on these AFK missions? Is it just the idle ships that are not in your current fleet?
So at the moment, this is just the first version of the feature. We're trying to get it in as quickly as possible. So it doesn't really use up any of your ships. You can still play with them. The AFK mission timer is fairly quick, but in the future, players will need to choose the ships to use. And in that case, they can't play with those at the same time. But for now, it doesn't really take up those ships. It doesn't use them up.
We have been working on the UI for that, right? We have a fleet management system. We could give them a sneak preview of that.
Yeah, we have a fleet management system, as Samson just mentioned. You can assign different ships to various fleets, as well as give them specific names, just so that you can help keep track of what type of fleet is for what type of purpose. If you populate it mostly with defensive ships, then you can name it accordingly so that you know, depending on what it is you're trying to do, whether it's in an AFK mission or a fleet you'd like to actually play with yourself, you can reach all of those pretty easily.
So eventually you can create certain fleets that will excel at certain AFK missions, right?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, so you can customize your fleets for your own use in the game. So you can make an offensive fleet or a fleet specially for mining. And of course, you can also make custom fleets for AFK missions.
Nice.
So the Hydra is actually meant to be a counter for the Tenebris as well. So the Tenebris is a long-range ship, does a lot of damage. You need to get to it before it can do too much damage. So we want to give players different tools for different problems. We don't just want to have a single hard counter for a specific problem. Mechs is one way to deal with the Tenebris, but the other is the Hydra. The Hydra is actually a solution for more than one problem. What it does is it closes the distance very quickly. It has an ability called Afterburner that basically accelerates the ship, gets it going very fast, and then suddenly decelerates it. So it stops where it wants to go. And once it's there, it does a lot of damage. So its weapons are short range, but it has a lot of them. So most ships have 2 primary weapons. The Hydra has 4. They are autocoil guns, which aren't the most powerful, but when you have 4 of those, it will probably be the highest DPS ship in the game. And it is also very heavily armored and heavily shielded. So this is basically, I'm not sure what you would compare to another game. It's like a barbarian in an RPG. So it gets in the middle of things, it does a lot of damage, and then it gets out. So it's not exactly like the Hammer. The Hammer is a frontline fighter with decent weapons, decent shields. This is a bit more specialized. So it's like a surgical strike rather than just something that you can keep doing. You need to use it with caution, like all the ships, but if used well, it can do a lot of damage.
It may not be immediately obvious where the name comes from, but the various weapons that it have can all aim in different directions at different targets. That's the planned implementation. That's most readily obvious when the ship is in assault mode. Probably my second favorite ship in the game.
What's your first?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it for the purposes of this talk. We haven't revealed it yet.
Okay, fair enough. So I guess the Hydra kind of looks like a Hydra. When it's in assault mode, it has, multiple heads if you look at the guns as heads, right? So Yeah, that's the Hydra. It's been ready for quite some time, but we wanted to release it as part of the container system. So that's what's holding us up. And it is supposed to be an NFT ship, so we had to have Sunny hook up a system that would allow us to do so. That's why it's taken some time. But I think the Hydra, along with some of the other ship abilities, will change the gameplay a lot. And it'll make things more dynamic, so you're not always trying to fight with long range versus long range.
One thing that's further down in the roadmap that we'll cover later is that the 8 drops are actually going to get mechs as well. So having just cannons and ballistas is not a good idea. Um, Anyone who plays strategy games or RPG games knows that glass cannons are useful, but you can't leave them undefended. So you have to protect them. And that's going to be the case later on as well when the 8 drops get a bit smarter, or something we're working on, and they get their own mechs as well. So just like how players can use the mechs to kill a Tenebris, the 8 drops can use their mechs to come after your cannons. So we'll have a counter for that. There's a ship coming later down the road that is a specialist at taking out enemy mechs. But of course, what we're doing here is building up strategies and counters to counters, which is what strategy games are all about. It's about knowing when to use the different strategies available, as opposed to having just one singular strategy.
Right now, mechs don't die, but I'm guessing when we give the Aatrox mechs, we have to have mechs die on both sides, right?
Absolutely. So they're gonna have the ships are gonna have point defense weapons, which are like I guess AA guns, like anti-air weapons on Earth. They're specialized in shooting down mechs. So depending on the ship you can have a different number of these weapons, and that's where the specialist ship comes in that we haven't released yet. So there's a whirlwind that has a lot of point defense weapons, and that is really great at taking out enemy mechs.
And let's move on. Containers in game, that's pretty self-explanatory. So right now containers are in the launcher and in the website, but we want them in the game, so they will be in the game.
So there is a random loot, which is in many ways a core feature in many games. When you kill enemies, you kind of want to get some reward for that. So we've added the loot drops. With the 8 drops, it's a bit tricky because they're aliens, so they can't really just drop human weapons. That wouldn't make too much sense considering the game.
They drop their own very specialized equipment, and we put in a fair bit of thought and research into what kind of technology makes sense for the way that the Aatrox both power their ships and move their ships through space.
Yep. So we really didn't want to, I guess, do what every other game does, which is what Yasser is touching on, which is, they'll drop some USF component. So they're supposed to be a superior force, higher tech, more advanced. So it doesn't make sense they would collect our stuff unless they're into collecting classical tech from the Dark Ages. But we wanted still to give players a loot drop. So we had to come up with a little bit of a workaround for that. So they drop their own stuff, but you can collect it. And some of that stuff, as Tim is mentioning, is valuable to the USF for research. So you go and bring it back to the USF, and then you can get something of the USF tech that you can equip and use yourself.
It is a valuable resource, and on release of the loot drops, we're going to have a couple of things in the game that players can use it for. And as we progress in development, we can always look at other ways that players can use it in the game. So it's something that players can treat as a kind of currency in a sense, that the more they kill, the more they have, and then the more they can use in various features.
One of the components that can be dropped is what we're just calling the Aatrox superconductor. Superconductors, they exist here on Earth, but they mostly have to exist under highly controlled and very difficult to sustain conditions. The Aatrox themselves have managed to create one for use in their ships. And part of the both look and the technology is that the material for it is superconductive, but it also has to be transparent to photons, meaning that it has to appear almost glassy, and that is so that gamma rays from the fusion reactions that happen inside of it can escape. But that also meant that we had to compensate for that by creating these sort of panels that appeared on the outside of the shell, which you can see in this artwork here. But we wanted to keep that kind of glassy appearance, which is why we split it up into those two different components.
So you won't see all that detail. You probably see some glowing orbs in the Aatrox debris, but that is what you're collecting, or one of the things that you're collecting.
One of the other things you collect is the strong force manipulator, which is what is specifically tied to the Aatrox thrusters. The thrusters are based on the ionization of radon gas, which is what gives them their red appearance. And in the case of the debris that you pick up here, that reaction has formed into a runaway. So it is just constantly being ionized and the radon gas is being violently expelled out, which is what gives it its glowing appearance.
Yep, and those are rare because the USF doesn't have these strong force manipulators that can decompose uranium into radon at will.
So players can collect them and then trade them in and get different kind of rewards for that they can use on their ships. So the more rare item, I think, is the strong force manipulator. That will give a lot more of this currency that they can trade in. So ultimately, they do transfer into something that is usable, but since players cannot sort of install a strong force manipulator into a USF ship because the technology is too advanced, there needs to be a step in between.
Plus, we don't use radon. What do we use again? Xenon. That's why we're blue and the Aatrox are red. We've given a lot of thought into the sci-fi lore of all this stuff.
So we have taken note of the request to add queues to fabricators, and that's perfectly valid. I think it's a great idea, and it is something we discussed as well. Of course, the current version of the fabricator is like the first implementation, so it does need improvement. And we've had this in our backlog for a while, so we've finally gotten around to sort of starting work on it, and it's going to be fairly soon. I don't want to give a date yet, but like many of these things on the roadmap, we're close. So it's coming. So queues are one thing where you can basically queue up a bunch of different items to fabricate, as opposed to just selecting multiple of the same item that you guys have now. And the other improvement is enhancement. So enhancement will allow the existing equipment to perform better. Basically, it's comparable to overclocking computer hardware. So that was the inspiration for it. It's something that's done in a lot of games as well, but in a sci-fi context, we're basically overclocking equipment. So you perform this enhancement on an item, its stats go up. How much it goes up by, it varies, just like with overclocking. So it depends on the silicon lottery. Or in the case of our game, not that, but it does vary. So you can enhance an item multiple times, but every time you enhance it, there's a risk that you destroy it. That risk will start very low, so it's usually worth enhancing everything at least once or twice. But eventually, it's up to you as a player, or up to you guys as players, to decide how much risk you want to take. So you can take a weapon and enhance it 10 times, and you're really risking it at that point. But it can be the most powerful secondary weapon in the game, and that has a lot of rarity. So if that's something that you equip on your ship, then you took a gamble and you won. But of course, you might end up losing it. So we want enhancing to be a little bit of a risk-reward kind of setup, where initially it's straightforward and almost guaranteed. The chance of failure is very low, but later on it becomes a bit of a gamble, and then players can decide, do they want that super unique weapon that they can only get by taking a lot of risk?
It's actually from Lineage 2. You can enchant your weapons like +1, +2, +3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. A lot of games do it. I think it will make customization a bit more interesting, and it adds a bit of risk reward to the whole fabrication. So outcomes are not guaranteed, but players don't need to be worried. So it's not going to be that risky from the start. The first few enhancements are almost foolproof, so very small chance of failure. And really, the risk comes in much later, and that's for players who are actually seeking it, who want that gamble.
Yeah. We finished the UI for that, right, Tim?
Yes, we have.
All right. So do you want to show off the enhance UI?
Yeah, the enhanced UI, you'll be taking various components or weapons on your ship and you'll be combining them with different resources to create the enhancement. Now, as Yasser just said, there is a certain chance of failure, which you can see in the image here, just so that you know what you're getting into. And if you fail, then there is also the separate chance of a critical failure, which you'll also be notified of here. But if it's successful, you will have a slightly more powerful device.
Do you remember the lore behind it? What was the lore for combining and enhancing?
It's overclocking. So I think it was Jonathan's idea, and he used that like comparison to overclocking pieces like video cards and CPUs.
Okay.
It's a bit of a stretch for things like armor plating, but we can say it's, I don't know, you're making it more dense but with some exotic procedure or something. So
Well, metallurgy always has the chance to go wrong. That's what the United States found out during the Cold War.
And this is going to be in the app, right? Or the Fabricator in-app is different. That's just the basic fabrication process in the companion app.
So this comes down to scheduling. Marine created wires for the app based on the current version of the Fabricator. If Unity builds them now, it's fine. But if they can't get around to it, not Unity, sorry, if the app team builds them now, it's fine. But if they can't get around to it until Unity starts work on the updated version, then Marine will need to give them new wires because it's going to be out of date immediately by the time it's done, basically.
Yeah. Okay, we'll figure that one out. Let's go to enemy rebel NPCs, then assault mode.
So enemy rebel NPCs is just to add a bit more variety to the kinds of enemies in the game. Basically, we want the human-controlled areas to have human enemies. Basically, outdated USF ships that are being used for piracy or by renegades, and players can fight them. And then those ships, of course, can drop usable equipment. This just allows players to get a taste of fighting Versas and Hammers, as opposed to always fighting Aatrox ships. It adds a bit of variety to the battles and to the strategies players need to use.
This is one of the most interesting features about the game, in my opinion, is that all of our ships from day one have been designed with the ability to transform into a humanoid combat mech, and that will change up the gameplay pretty substantially. So every ship in the game can do this, every player-controlled ship anyway. There are some NPC ships like mining barges and the like that can't, but every ship can transform into assault mode, and when that happens, you will gain access to, in some cases, additional weaponry or improved combat ability, and probably most significantly, the core benefit of having the humanoid form is multi-targeting, being able to use your primary weapons on multiple enemy ships simultaneously rather than only having to point directly in front of you.
Yeah, it's big. I think a lot of players are not fully understanding how much this is going to change gameplay, but I would say it's quite significant because now you have another dimension to it and you have basically new abilities for ships.
Yep, it's going to be super impressive on the Hydra as well, like they mentioned earlier. Lots of arms.
I think we should probably mention the V0 of the assault mode feature won't have the ability to target separate targets, well, multi-target for some of the ships with arms, with weapons as arms. So that'll probably come with an update after we get assault mode out. Also, assault mode will require an item to unlock, so you'll need to get transformation engines per ship as an equipable item for that ship to transform. So it's one more thing to collect.
And that engine, once you have it, can can be transferred between ships. So a ship being equipped with the engine allows it to transform. But just because you buy it for one particular ship doesn't mean it's necessarily locked to that ship.
Yeah. And I think those will be enhanceable too, with enhancements affecting transformation time. So if you can enhance it to max level, you'll transform faster.
We're going to be adding loot drops from space debris as well. So that's like your traditional finding stuff in a chest in most MMOs, where you explore space and you see some wreckage, you scan it, and oh, great, there's an awesome reward in there. So it's always quite satisfying to find things like that when you're out exploring. And it's also one of the first steps we're taking towards making exploration fun. There'll be a lot more coming later, but right now we understand that the gameplay is mining and shooting at Aatrox, and there isn't too much put into actually exploring. But that is certainly an angle that we want to improve upon. It's a very important part of the game, and it will be a lot more interesting in the future, but this is like a first step towards it, coming across some wreckage, scanning it, extracting some reward, and that should hopefully make moving around those locations much more interesting. And then there's the Aatrox AI improvements. So right now, the Aatrox can be a bit of a challenge because their stats are comparable to players. They are actually somewhat weaker, but they are still quite a powerful force. We're going to improve on that by giving ships more abilities to counter them. But at the same time, we've come to notice that the battles are a little bit too straightforward. So you get close enough to the Aatrox to shoot at them, they get close enough to you to shoot at you, and it's a battle of attrition where the two groups are just shooting at each other. So we want to make the Aatrox a little bit smarter, not harder. So we don't want them to be harder and make the experience more frustrating, but we do want them to be smarter so that it makes players think about how they fight them, about what ships they use against them, about what abilities they use and when. So we're looking at different improvements we can do to the Aatrox to make them a little bit more of an interesting enemy. They're not going to be super smart like another player in PvP, but they are going to be smarter. So they're going to have different strategies that they use. Players are going to get familiar with those strategies and be ready with counters, but that's very much a part of the tactics in the game. So hopefully that should improve the overall experience, and it won't just be a matter of waiting it out to see who can do the most damage.
Sounds good.
All right, and then we have unique abilities for the Cannon, Ballista, Lancer, and Tempest. That is a big one, and it would change a lot in the game. So all those ships are already available, and some of the players own them already. But as some players haven't noticed and commented, they aren't as useful as some of the other ships. So the Cannon and the Ballista are useful, but that's because of their range, not really because of their special abilities or what they can do. We are going to be modifying them. So the Cannon, this might be a bit of a controversial one, but it will only really be able to fire once its ability is enabled. The reason for that is that the Cannon is a very powerful weapon. It was never really meant to be able to fire while moving because all the power is being directed to the weapon. So its engines aren't supposed to be functioning at that point. It can rotate somewhat, but it can't really move. So what the ability will do is it will shut down movement, it will only enable rotation, and enable the cannon's primary weapons. We're probably gonna increase the damage a bit as well to make it more worthwhile to use, but that will make the cannon a bit like a
siege
tank. Kind of like a weapon. Sorry?
A siege tank.
A siege tank, exactly. It's like a siege tank in StarCraft. So super powerful at the cost of movement. And that was always really the intention with the cannon. But like with many things, we're gradually working towards that. The Ballista is a different type of long-range ship. With the ballista, the movement will stay as is, but it will have an ability where it creates this large ball of plasma. Currently, it's firing small balls of plasma, but what it can do is it creates a large, massive ball and then propels it forward. So that's a great AoE weapon and good at taking out groups of enemies.
So it's like the Vegeta ball that he throws.
Exactly. I think it was inspired by that, and it would probably look a bit like that as well.
Well, I can say firsthand, since I made the mock-up for the VFX, that was not my intention, but I'm glad you got that out of it.
It looks pretty cool in any case, though. And then there's the Lancer. So the Lancer is a very special ship. Later on, the Aatrox are going to have point defense weapons. So they're going to be able to shoot down missiles. The Lancer is a counter to that. So what it does is that it fires shells with its railguns, basically. And when those shells are close to the enemy, they open up and they release a missile. So that shell gets the missile past the enemy's point defense weapons, and that way the missiles always strike. So another thing we're going to be doing with missiles is we're going to be sort of probably tuning them to be a little bit more damaging. I've seen the feedback that it takes a lot of physical effort to keep pressing the buttons to get any DPS out of them. So I'm looking into that one. We're basically going to increase the number of missiles fired and increase the cooldown time. So a single press of that button will release a lot more missiles over time, and then you guys don't have to sort of put so much effort into pressing the button.
You could also do autocast, like right click on the missiles and it does the Warcraft 3 autocasting.
Yep, definitely. We do need autocast. I think that's somewhere in the backlog as well. So that's another thing we should be doing. We're probably going to have certain abilities on ships, like heal, that players do want to autocast. We don't have a healer yet, but I think that's coming in the future. But yes, autocast is something we should definitely have. And then there's pulse scan. We had that in alpha.
Wait, you skipped the Tempest.
Oh, the Tempest, sorry, yes, the Tempest. The Tempest is quite a special ship. I think it's comparable to the Science Vessel, if I remember right, in StarCraft.
Yeah.
So it's a crowd control ship. It is a specialist, so it's not something that can be just sent out there on its own, but it can do a lot of damage in the right hands. So it has an ability that basically completely stuns an opponent. So if you are facing off against, I guess, a Valen, which can do a lot of damage, or perhaps an elite, having a Tempest in your fleet can basically stun it and allow you to do a lot of damage to it before it sort of can recover. It will also have an EMP storm ability that basically damages the shields of all enemies around it. So if the Aatrox decide to sort of send a lot of Muskas or some other faster, smaller ships to sort of swarm around it, it can use that to get itself out of trouble. So it behaves very much like a crowd controller. It has tools to sort of protect itself and also to sort of prevent the enemy's ability to attack you. But yes, like with most of our ships, it does require a bit of tactics to use. So it's not foolproof at all.
Okay, pulse scan.
Pulse scan. So pulse scan is coming back. It was in alpha. It was super cool. It was a great feature, especially now that we have Fog of War in the game. Pulse scan is going to be really useful for finding out where all the enemies are. And at the moment, there isn't too much exploration involved in finding asteroids to mine. Unlike Alpha, in Alpha you have to first pulse scan the area you're in, and then you could see where the asteroids are. So we're going to fix that with pulse scan. Mining should be a little bit about exploration, should be about avoiding enemies when you want to, or not when you don't. And that's why sort of Fog of War and pulse scan work together. Now, when it comes to exploration and Fog of War, again, we want to give players different options. So I think one player mentioned that pulse scan should be a bit like sonar. And that's exactly what we'd like. But one downside of sonar is that when you emit a pulse, the enemy knows where you are. And that's something that's going to be the case with the pulse scan as well. Old ships can do pulse scan, but it will attract enemies. That's something that can be used strategically as well. So you might want to lay a trap for enemies. You're going to have a bunch of, let's say, I don't know, cannons or hammers waiting, and then you use pulse scan with one ship. You draw the enemies in, and you hit them from behind.
You got to set up your ships in like a star formation. This is for the editor. There was an image I captured during a playtest a very long time ago where I think Seb somehow managed to get all of his ships facing in the 6, cardinal directions to create like this weird star shape. I think that might be a funny image to include.
So you can basically set up ambushes with pulse scan. So it's not necessarily a downside that it attracts enemies. And one of the features we have planned on the roadmap, which we're going to discuss in a minute, I think it's after the next one, the directional damage, that actually comes into play here.
Perfect segue.
Yeah. So directional damage. Oh, by the way, just one thing. Aside from pulse scan, there will be other options in the future to sort of explore the fog of war. So it won't just be this. There's going to be options with Mechs to send them out scouting. There's going to be things like a beacon ability that you can deploy to understand if there are enemies in an area and so on. So one of the things that we'd like to emphasize is that as a strategy game, Infinite Fleet is all about options. So there won't just be one strategy. It won't just be about using cannons and ballistas. We want to have different options, different challenges, and it's up to you guys, the players, to choose what you want, how you want to tackle things. So but we really do not want to force players to do the same thing repeatedly. In a way, strategy games are about creativity, finding creative solutions to problems.
Yeah, your job is making creative problems, right?
Yes, that bit is up to us. So, and well, the Atrox AI improvements hopefully will help with that. So, and then there's directional damage. So previously we talked about setting traps with pulse scan, pulling the enemies in, and that's something players are doing already. We know. It will be a lot more meaningful with directional damage. So when an enemy ship is hit from behind, they tend to have less shielding and less armor there, so you can destroy them more quickly. So hitting them from the side will also be somewhat better, but behind is always the best. Hitting them from the front really is a last resort. So if they ambush you and you don't have time to prepare, then it is a disadvantage. But of course, there will be counters to that. So you can deploy a shield with the Guardian, or you can send out your mechs before they reach you. But if as a player you are setting an ambush for the enemy, then it's really good to attack them from behind. So let them move ahead of you and then shoot them from the back.
Anyone who's ever watched an episode of BattleBots know how important this can be.
So hopefully more tactics there, more things to do. I think, so what all this is probably pointing to is a more strategic tactical game where there's more planning involved. It's less shooter, less arcade, so it's less reacting and more planning. So hopefully once all these things are in, the game will be fun in that way as a strategy game. And then of course we can always adjust and tune things. So I know there has been feedback with the speed, but perhaps when all these features are in, it will be a little bit more clear why ships are somewhat more slow now. And perhaps even more, it will be even beneficial because there'll be more time to plan things out and react properly.
Tim, you've got an image there for the directional damage panel that's showing a ship in various stages of ruin and damage. That's not in yet, right? Is that coming?
That is coming. So the major artistic change that's going to accompany this feature is a more visual sort of damage feedback. Rather than just looking at your hull bar or your armor bar, we're going to be setting up the ships where the internal components of your ship will start to get revealed as that particular section of the ship gets more and more damaged. Now, as Yasser was saying, the feature from a design perspective is about your ship taking more or less damage depending on which side it was hit from. But to help emphasize that you're getting hit from a particular side, you'll see that that side or that portion of your ship where you're hit starts to look more and more worn away.
That reminds me, you better put it in the backlog to do damage for Aatrox as well.
Yep, that's also there, and in that same vein, there's also similar types of damage to the stations.
Yeah.
Yeah, this video is mainly just a proof of concept, just to make sure that the shader would work and that the mesh would work alongside the shader to produce the effect we want. It's going to be a little while before this is in the game. Being able to attack, damage, and destroy stations is a ways off. It's not even on this particular roadmap, but these kinds of features, being able to show you more real updates of what's happening to your fleet and to your outposts, is all stuff that we want to do from an art perspective.
So you'll be able to eventually blast a hole right through a station.
Yep, as you can see right here in this video, we have a hole cut clean through to the other side.
All right. Procedural galaxy? That's a big one.
Yeah, it is. So one of the promise of Infinite Fleet was that there would be a huge galaxy to explore. So
An infinite galaxy, maybe? No, it's not
almost.
infinite.
It's not.
It was pretty
Sorry,
big.
guys.
So the first step to creating a very large space to explore is to build a procedural system that creates that. Right now, we're building the levels by hand, which is a fairly time-consuming process. But we're going to move over to a procedural system that builds it for us. So there will be a lot of different areas to explore. And the first step is to create locations that are similar to what we have right now. But as we progress, as we improve the game, we're going to add more things to each of those levels as well. And with a procedural system, it's going to be a lot easier because we don't need to manually update each level. Instead, we update the system, and that in turn places those things. So one example would be the loot drops from space debris. So all these wrecks that you can find while you're exploring. So right now, we'd have to go into each level and place them by hand. But once we have a procedural system, we can just update the system to do that. And as we are improving our level design and adding more pieces to the levels to make them interesting, we can just keep updating that system. So this will create a lot more locations to explore, a much bigger galaxy, and in the long run, it will make it easier to expand on the gameplay as well. So we can add more content to the levels far more easily.
Yep. I think the loot drops and stuff might come later. The core system that we've been building is just generating the planets, stars, and moons and things like that.
Oh wait, sorry. We can edit this out, I guess. The procedural galaxy here, is it just the sectors and regions, or is it the POIs as well?
It should be the POIs.
Okay. I mean, yeah, in that case, we can basically do loot drops too. So if the generator can put in asteroids, then technically it can put in anything. So
yeah, I'm just saying the first version may not have it, but we can add it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right now at least there's no real tie between the ambient scene and the actual game level. So if we want to, as a first implementation, just focus on the ambient scenes and then we'll use stock game level layouts, that would be at least a faster implementation.
So then we have group events. So that feature exists already. It hasn't been disabled, but it might as well be. The rewards are very low for that. We need to put in a little bit more work into it so that it functions the way we would like to. As the name implies, it's a group event. So it's there to reward players for cooperating, for working together, which it isn't doing quite well. So what we're going to do is we're going to reward players based on contribution to the objective. So if the objective is to kill 10 enemies in Lessie, then depending on how much damage each player has done, they will get a piece of the prize, so a chunk of the total USF credits. And that should basically encourage everyone to contribute and keep it fair. We're still looking at the design to how to make it as fair as possible. So we don't want people who contributed to be left out. So we might adjust those rules. That's something that's still a work in progress, but our ultimate goal with this feature is to reward people for working together. So another thing we're going to do with that is we're probably going to limit how many group events players can do each day, because we don't want the game to be just about that. So what we noticed is that wherever we give rewards, that's what the game becomes about. So that's where the emphasis is. So we want people to work together, but we also want them to explore, to go to new locations. So we don't want to keep people at one location because of a very rewarding group event. So that's something they'll be able to do. That's something we're going to give rewards for. But we want other things as well to be rewarding. So that's why we have the loot drops. That's why we have the wreckage in space you can discover. So we want players to do different things. As for the whole AFK aspect, there's a limit to how much can be made with group events, and contribution is required. So players can't really just sort of stay in one place and collect these rewards. But of course, they have the AFK missions for that. So there's something for everybody. We're not taking away anything. We're just adding. And once this feature is the way it's meant to be, hopefully players are going to have a lot more fun because there'll be more people willing to play together. So I know that it's right now our servers aren't as full as they could be, so it's a bit difficult to find people to play with. But with these rewards, hopefully everyone's going to be a lot more excited about playing together. Maybe we should edit that bit out because I shouldn't talk about servers being empty. Sorry.
Let's go on to ship tech trees.
Ship tech trees are basically the passive skills for the ships. So currently they have the abilities that are the active skills, and then we're going to have a tech tree that players can basically upgrade to unlock various passives. It's very similar to what's in other MMOs with the skill trees. Each ship is going to have an offensive, a defensive, and a specialization tree. The specialization tree is going to be unique, and that's where players can basically customize the skills of their ships to behave in a certain way. So you can have two Versas, but they somehow behave differently or good in a different way because of that customization. So ultimately, we want players to have quite a bit of freedom with how they set up their ships. They can use different equipment, and they can adjust their skill trees as well. And of course, once they add the ships to the fleets, they can customize their fleets as well. So overall, each fleet will be very unique and will function very differently. So that's quite a lot of customization, and hopefully that will create a lot of interesting strategies and unique solutions to the problems we're presenting.
Yep, it's long overdue.
We're adding new weapon types. We basically don't have any area of effect weapons yet, but that is coming. So we have the magnetar gun that basically fires a projectile that creates a magnetar around it that does a lot of damage to the ships in its vicinity. And also the plasma burst gun. The plasma burst gun fires off a cone of plasma. So it's a great short-range weapon, does a lot of damage, but of course the downside is the range. But it's perfect for certain ships that have a lot of armor and can close distances very quickly.
What is a magnetar?
It's it's typically in reference to a type of celestial body that has an extraordinarily intense magnetic field, which is why the effect for this particular weapon is based on that sort of torus shape that you get with magnetic fields and the different polarities between them. That is harnessed in these weapons, and that's what creates the area that the area of effect damage is applied from.
Have we made the VFX yet or not?
Yes, we did make VFX for it.
Oh, nice. Let's see it.
The next bit, mining barges. So right now, mining is a fairly straightforward activity. You scan an asteroid, send the mining drones, they extract it, and it's done. So we want that to be a little bit more interesting than that. So ships are going to have mining barges that players will need to protect. So these barges, exit the docks of the Centurion. They go off, do their business, do their work, and while that's happening, the Aatrox can of course ambush us now, and in that case, players need to protect them. It does make mining a bit more challenging, but not necessarily harder. So we're gonna give players lots of tools to protect these. The Shield Guardian already exists. The Guardian's Shield already exists. We're gonna upgrade the hammer as well. So there should be different options for that. And also there will be different types of mining barges. So some of them will be more effective, extracting certain types of resources. And this will tie into the prospector that can equip specialized mining barges.
So are all ships going to have barges, or is it just this prospector?
Well, the plan was all ships. So, because that's an overhaul of the entire mining feature.
The prospector just carries a large number of barges.
So when I joined, I still remember the design. The spec was to make, the wording was it should be competitive, so that the people who get their barges to the asteroid first will basically lock the mining slots. So they will start sort of extracting, and there's a limited number of these slots. So it's meant to be a bit of a race, like a gold rush.
Okay, nice.
But yeah, well, we need to implement it.
Yeah, that's pretty far out there. That's why it's at the end of the roadmap.
Yeah.
Okay, we're reaching the end. How about Aatrox mining operations? What are those?
So the Aatrox mining operation is basically the Aatrox doing what players do, and the players getting to ambush them. So the Aatrox are in the areas that the players are visiting. They have specialized mining ships. They have their own ships protecting them, and the player has a chance to attack them. I guess in a way it's a bit of a payback for all the ambushes that Aatrox are doing to players right now, but it adds a different kind of gameplay, so the roles are reversed a bit. And of course, destroying the Aatrox prevents them from taking the resources, and then players can basically mine those asteroids themselves.
Aatrox mining is very different than our mining, right? I think, Tim, we worked a lot on the concept and the mechanics behind it.
One of the big challenges with Aatrox mining was making it sufficiently different in function and scope to what the USF is capable of. The Aatrox are a highly advanced race and they're very well established. We went through a couple iterations of the different types of mining that they could do. And Samson, I'm not sure exactly how much detail you want me to go into with this for the sake of this video.
Whatever you remember.
All right, so we started with some ideas of having the Aatrox ship be these massive behemoths of machinery that would engulf the entire asteroid and then slowly crush it inside to extract whatever resources were necessary. But as the design was iterated on, we figured that the Aatrox would be a little bit more elegant than that. And now they use technology that is capable of heating up entire asteroids to the point where they become essentially liquefied and then extracting the resources from that. So effectively acting kind of like a tick on the top of the asteroid, absorbing resources and getting bigger until it's able to haul those processed ores off.
Yeah, I think the first one you can call it the Unicron method, just eating the whole thing. But I think we went with the second one. We can call it your tick method. But the thinking was that we wanted it very readable. So if you warp into some area, you can kind of look at the map and you can see some glowing asteroids. And those are the ones that the Aatrox are heating up and extracting resources from. And I think with your kind of tick analogy there, you can also pick off and take their resources too, because they've kind of done the hard work for you, extracting everything valuable from the asteroid, right?
Yeah, not 100% sure if we agreed design-wise whether or not the ore process that's left out in the open would be stealable, I guess would be the terminology. But it is an object that would be present on the outside of this ship rather than on the inside like it is with the USF.
It would be nice loot.
Yeah, it would be, but is that too lucrative?
Well, we can say most of the ore is destroyed when the ship blows up, just scattered. But there's some left over.
Yeah.
So if it's like an entire asteroid's worth, that's like, I don't know how many tons. It's an insane amount, though much bigger than a ship can carry.
Anyways, we can work that out. That's pretty far out there, still in the timeline. I guess you can see that there's a lot of stuff that is coming, and a lot of it is focused on improving gameplay. It may not be immediately apparent from looking at the timeline, but everything is centered around making gameplay more interesting and more tactical. So we hope that you will stick around and experience all these changes. And as the game is still in beta, you can help us find and identify bugs.
Well put, Samson.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks for watching.
All right. See ya.
See you in the game.